I hear her too. But one of the things about Heschel's book on the prophets is that he tries to place this into a context of Greek thought about religion, right? Which, by the way, is a tremendous influence on Christianity and much less of an influence on Judaism. But one of the interesting things in this unit is that he also takes some time to talk about the contrast with Eastern religions. So for instance, in the one-volume book on page 235, he compares it with Taoism, right? The Tao, the way of Lao Tzu, forms an antithesis to the prophetic idea of God. Tao, the ultimate ground from which all things emanate, is a dark, abysmal something, nameless and indefinite. Tao is the eternal silence, the everlasting calm, the unchangeable law of cosmic order, immanent in all things. Quietism is the typical manner of a life in harmony with Tao. And he quotes Lao Tzu as saying, heaven and earth do not act from any wish to be benevolent. They deal with all things as the dogs of grass are dealt with. The sages do not act from any wish to be benevolent. They deal with the people as the dogs of grass are dealt with. Right? So, and in Confucianism, absolute distance and aloofness characterize the supreme being in Confucianism, in which there is a reverent recognition of heaven as the source from which man derives his nature, although for the attainment of virtue, little importance is attached to any communication between heaven and man. The God of Israel, in contrast, you knew that contrast was coming, is not a law, but the lawgiver. The order he established is not a rigid, unchangeable structure, but a historic, dynamic reality, a drama. What the prophets proclaim is not God's silence, but God's pathos.
God's what?
Pathos. Right? The sense that God cares what's going on. Okay? So I thought that's an interesting point for Heschel to have brought up. Most people writing about the prophets in the 20th century in the West would not be thinking about Eastern religions, right? And drawing parallels. Right? Heschel was pretty broad in his scope. Right? Let me skip to a couple of other pieces of Heschel that I wanted to call your attention to that have to do with this philosophy of pathos, which for him is what really makes the prophets run. Right? There wouldn't be prophecy if God didn't have this intense concern for his people. Okay? So, the people, the philosophical approach to God tries to depict God as inherently rational, unmoved, unchanged by the events on this planet. It says, is it more compatible with our conception of the grandeur of God to claim that he is emotionally blind to the misery of man rather than profoundly moved? In order to conceive of God not as an onlooker, but as a participant, to conceive of man not as an idea in the mind of God, but as a concern. The category of divine pathos is an indispensable implication. In other words, God doesn't care, then where's the moral quality of God? Right? Heschel would rather have a moral God than a philosophically consistent God. Right? Continuing on the next page here, this is 258. Right? The ideal state of the Stoic sage is apathy. The ideal state of the prophet is sympathy. The Greeks attributed to the gods the state of happiness and serenity. The prophets thought of God's relation to the world as one of concern and compassion. To quote Nietzsche, the dignity of death and a kind of consecration of passion has perhaps never yet been represented more beautifully than by certain Jews of the Old Testament. To these, even the Greeks could have gone to school. In other words, it's the prophetic understanding of God as one of ultimate caring and concern that makes God meaningful for human beings. Last piece here. Pathos implied no inner bondage, no enslavement to impulse, no subjugation by passion. It doesn't mean that God is wildly erratic by the fact that God is moved by human suffering, but a willed transitive feeling which existed only in relation to man. An apathetic and ascetic God would have struck biblical man with a sense not of dignity and grandeur, but rather of poverty and emptiness. In other words, the God who does not care, the God who is the unmoved mover, right? That's the philosophical term often used for God, right? That's a God who's impoverished. Caring is what makes God meaningful. So, comments or questions? Anything we're referring to? Yeah, Jerry and then Ron.
Unmoved God. So if you take that philosophy, but it's still, he has malachim, angels coming on certain occasions, right? That means he doesn't care, he just hires somebody else to do it, right?
No.
No?
No.
That doesn't mean.
Yeah, he hires angels because he does care.
Yeah, I know.
Because he has something that needs to be done.
Yeah, I know. But that's it. So on top, he cares, but he executes it through somebody else, right?
Maybe, right? After all, we are also God's agents.
You're a malach.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but from whom?
Yeah.
Never assume that a man is a messenger of God. He's always a messenger, but he might be from the other side. Okay? Yeah.
Does Heschel ever discuss why God chose to create the universe and man?
What was the question?
What does Heschel ever discuss why God chose to create the universe? Yes, and I think you'll see it in his more theological writings, in his book, Man is Not Alone and God in Search of Man. That's where I think he discusses it most. Okay? Maybe touches on it a little bit in this book. Okay, now we come to the prophet Jeremiah. I've been waiting for this.
My favorite.
Yeah, Jeremiah's he's not a real fun guy. Most of the prophets are not fun people, but Jeremiah, at least, just to date him, his period of prophecy runs about 40 years, right up until the destruction of the temple, from around 627 before the Common Era to 586. And the best place to begin is with the beginning of the book, chapter 1 of Jeremiah. Right? So here we go. The words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests of Anatot in the territory of Benjamin. The word of the Lord came to him in the days of King Josiah, son of Amnon of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign, and throughout the days of King Joachim, son of Josiah of Judah, and until the end of the 11th year of King Zedekiah, son of Josiah of Judah, when Jerusalem went into exile in the 5th month. The word of the Lord came to me. So now we're first person. Before I created you in the womb, I selected you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet concerning the nations. I replied, "Oh, Lord God, I don't know how to speak. I'm still a boy." The Lord said to me, do not say you are still a boy. Go wherever I send you, speak whatever I command you. Have no fear of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. The Lord put out his hand and touched my mouth. I know you know God doesn't have a hand. Jeremiah doesn't know that. Okay? And the Lord said to me, herewith I put my words into your mouth. See, I appoint you this day over nations and kingdoms, to uproot and to pull down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. Now, about 2/3 of that is going to make somebody very unpopular. The part about uprooting and destroying, as opposed to the part about building, right? People are okay usually with building, right? As long as it doesn't block their view of, nature, right? But uprooting and destroying, they are not going to like it. And Jeremiah knows that they are not going to like what they hear from him. So they're not going to like him. The word of the Lord came to me. What do you see, Jeremiah? I replied, I see a branch of an almond tree. The Lord said to me, you got that right. It says, you have seen right. You got that right, for I am watchful to bring my word to pass. There's a pun between shaked, which means almond, and shoked, which means watchful. Okay. And the word of the Lord came to me a second time. What do you see? I replied, I see a steaming pot tipped away from the north. And the Lord said to me, from the north was always where armies came to Israel. Okay? The Lord said to me, from the north shall disaster break loose upon all the inhabitants of the land. For I am summoning all the peoples of the kingdoms of the north, declares the Lord. They shall come, and shall each set up a throne before the gates of Jerusalem, against its walls round about, and against all the towns of Judah, and I will argue my case against them for all their wickedness. They have forsaken me, and sacrificed to other gods, and worship the works of their hands. Look at the Jews. So you, Jeremiah, gird up your loins. Arise and speak to them all that I command you. Do not break down before them, lest I break you before them. In other words, don't give up, because if you do, I'm going to make you regret it. I make you this day a fortified city, an iron pillar, and bronze walls against the whole land, against Judah's kings and officers, and against its priests and citizens. They will attack you, but they shall not overcome you. For I am with you, declares the Lord, to save you. What do you get from that?
Make it happen.
Make it, Jeremiah, you better make it happen. You will make it happen. What else?
Nothing bad is going to happen to you. Nothing destructive is going to happen.
Nothing destructive is going to, they will not break you. they can make things pretty nasty for you, and they do. We'll see that shortly, right? But there are bad things going on, and you're gonna tell it like it is. And how's Jeremiah supposed to feel about that? Thank you, God, for making me the most unpopular person in Judea. That's Jeremiah, right? And Jeremiah does not want to be God's prophet, right? You know, I'm still a boy. God says, oh, you are, right? You know, and by the way, chapter 16, Jeremiah, I'm not going to read it right now, but chapter 16 tells that Jeremiah doesn't even get to have a family. Why? Oh, you know, it's sad. Why? Because they would only suffer along with him, right? People would take it, you know, people who don't like somebody, they'll take it out on their family. So God says, sorry, this is also part of your fate. You don't get to have a family, right? Of course, you know, realize neither did Moses. Not much of one anyway. You know, hardly anybody applies for the job of being a prophet, right?
Right, you're called.
You know, you're called, and God is not swayed by excuses. Oh, I'm just a boy. No, you're a boy, all right. You're my boy.
How old is
See
he?
at this time.
Doesn't say, but, you know, he's probably a young man. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to get away with saying, I'm still a boy. He's a young man. Well, 13. No, probably a little.
I say he's 18.
But he's probably old enough to get married, but he's not going to. Right? And the terrible thing about being a prophet, especially for Jeremiah, is the necessity of being at war with the times. He will be at war with both the political and the religious leadership. And of all the prophets, he is the most explicit about the difficulty of carrying an unpopular message to a hostile audience. You know, in a time and place where free speech is not exactly guaranteed. Right? Yeah, Ron.
What was Jeremiah before he was, received the call from God?
Boy.
Well, no, I mean.
Well, he is the son of one of the priests at Anatot in the territory of Benjamin. That's what we're told. From that, I would assume that he had a little bit of education. Okay? But we really don't know a whole lot more. And you know, each of the prophets expresses God's message in their own way, in their language. So the eloquence of Jeremiah, as we'll see later on, is considerable. So consistent with somebody who had pretty good education for the time.
But he doesn't do his own writing, he has a scribe Baruch.
Well, he has a scribe who takes down what he says. He doesn't write, I mean, if he writes it down, it's, you know, he writes maybe drafts of what he's gonna say, but he winds up later on having a scribe who writes down and preserves all of his messages. Right? Yeah, Lou.
Has there been any thought that maybe it was Baruch who
Actually authored these?
not just did the handwriting, but was the conceptual motivation behind it?
Yes, probably not. You know, it's one of those interesting skeptical ideas about, you know, the way the Bible tells us may not be exactly the way it works, but probably not. Yeah.
Is this the first time where God said you're not allowed to get married, you're gonna kind of be celibate? Is
Well,
that a concept that went on
It
to?
doesn't say celibate, it just says you can't have a family.
No, I understand that, but this is pretty
well,
drastic.
who would want this guy anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, he's the most unpopular person in town. So, you know, who's gonna attach themselves to him? We saw with Hosea that God took a very direct hand in his marital life. So, you know, it might have been a very common thing among the prophets. We don't know. We only know what we're told. It's hard to generalize about that. Okay? So, you know, people don't like change. I mean, welcome to 21st century America. But, you know, people don't like change, and especially when they're told you're doing it wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Or you've been doing it wrong,
For sure.
like
That's right.
since 1619 or whatever. Okay?
Come on.
Um,
The dawn of mankind.
since the dawn of mankind. Or, you know, now maybe sometimes you appreciate being corrected. You know, you're trying to change a tire, and you know, so you know, you're glad to have somebody to tell you how to do it properly, show you how to do it properly, so that you don't break an axle, right? You know, so he warns the people that the temple will fall. You know, he's going to see the temple fall. Don't take refuge in it when the time comes, because it won't save you. He knows that it won't work. He knows that that won't help. And it's a very common idea in the prophets that the temple and all of its rituals will not save the people when the time comes. All that notion about, you know, God will protect us because we're so loyal to God and we do all the rituals and blah, 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 blah. And Jeremiah just says, forget it. Not going to help. Not at all. Right? And so how does Jeremiah feel about being in this role? Not good, I would imagine, right? See the beginning of chapter 12, where he says to God, "You will win, O Lord, if I make claim against you. Yet I shall present charges against you. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why are the workers of treachery at ease?" In other words, you know, this is the way it is. And you want me to protest against all that? You want me to try to fix that? To try to change people's minds? You know, wish me luck. You know, because it's not going to work. It doesn't work. And that's your fault, God, because you set up the world that way. And now you want me to fix it. Thanks a lot. Go.
So many of the prophets espouse poor behavior of the people, and sometimes predict, I don't want to use that word, but the consequences of their poor behavior.
Yeah.
And yet, hardly ever, if ever, the people change, except for Jonah and Nineveh.
Yes,
perhaps.
that's the exception that proves the rule.
So is
And
God?
it's not an exception because they're not Jewish. If you prophesy to the Jews, they will not like you.
So is God really expecting the people to change, or is he just engaging the prophets to tell it like it is, regardless of potential
Regardless
for
of
change?
whether it's going to work. Yeah, I think we have to assume that.
Assume
That God, you know, knows that the odds are stacked against him. But he's going to send the prophet anyway. Yeah, it's It's interesting, in rabbinic Judaism, this is not in the prophets, but in rabbinic Judaism, there are certain crimes where you can only be punished for them if you were warned.
Yeah, that's right, I've heard of that before.
Yeah, so like, murder is a capital crime, but you can't be put to death for it unless somebody warned you, like right when you were about to do it. Right? You know that you could be put to death for that. You know that's capital crime. You know. Yeah. I mean, like, who's going to tell somebody that when they're in the midst of strangling somebody, right? But still, you have to be warned. Nowadays, we presume that people know that strangling somebody else is against the law, right? But,
One would
for
hope.
capital punishment in Jewish law, it requires that the people be warned. Number one, what you're doing is wrong, and number two, you yourself could be put to death for that.
And 2 witnesses.
And there have to be 2 witnesses. Right? So, yeah,
In modern times, would DNA qualify as a witness?
well, of course, they
There
don't
is.
have DNA, so yeah, I mean, we add all kinds of evidence, right? Now, would it be enough to convict somebody and impose capital punishment? That's an interesting question. Okay? I won't try to spend the rest of the hour, dealing with that one. Okay? So, here are some of the bad things that happened to Jeremiah. All right? Here's the beginning of chapter 20. Pashhur, son of Immer, the priest who was chief officer of the house of the Lord, heard Jeremiah prophesy certain things. Pashhur thereupon had Jeremiah flogged and put in the cell at the upper Benjamin gate in the house of the Lord. Right? Right. So what is Jeremiah? I mean, Jeremiah also says, Pashhur, you're going to get the same fate as everybody else. But he turns to God and says, you enticed me, O Lord, and I was enticed. You overpowered me, and you prevailed. I have become a constant laughing stock. Everyone jeers at me. For every time I speak, I must cry out, must shout lawlessness and rapine. For the word of the Lord causes me constant disgrace and contempt. I thought, I will not mention him, no more will I speak in his name. But his word was like a raging fire in my heart. Shut up in my bones, I could not hold it in. I was helpless. I heard the whispers of the crowd. Terror all around. Inform. Let us inform against him. All my supposed friends are waiting for me to stumble. Perhaps he can be entrapped. We can prevail against him. Take our vengeance on him. The Lord is with me like a mighty warrior, therefore my persecutors shall stumble, etc., etc. So Jeremiah, not very happy with God. He says, this is later on in chapter 20, accursed be the day that I was born. Let not the day be blessed when my mother bore me. Accursed be the man who brought my father the news and said, a boy is born to you, and gave him such joy. Let that man become like the cities which the Lord overthrew without relenting. Let him hear shrieks in the morning and battle shouts at noontide, because he didn't kill me before birth, so that my mother might be my grave and her womb big with me for all time. Why did I ever issue from the womb to see misery and woe, spend all my days in shame?
I thought they had a miserable life.
Sounds that way.
Is he a little depressed there?
You think? Just a little. Right? So, yeah, Jerry?
So this is the first time where having a birthday is not a good thing.
Yeah, it's definitely not a good thing. So, share with you at the end of chapter 11. This is where his townspeople plot against him. Right? Thus said the Lord of hosts concerning the men of Anatot who seek your life. His own hometown people want to kill him. They say, you must not prophesy anymore in the name of the Lord, or you will die by our hand. Assuredly, thus said the Lord of hosts, I'm going to deal with them. The young men shall die by the sword, their boys and girls by famine. No remnant shall be left of them. I will bring disaster on the men of Anatot, the year of their doom. All right, so, that's fine as far as taking care of them, but it doesn't necessarily make it any better for Jeremiah that his own hometown people want to kill him. Right? The people he grew up with. Right? When he opposes a Judean alliance with Egypt and urges surrender to the Babylonians, they send him to prison. Eventually, there's a group of priests and so-called prophets who charge that his message of discontent is sowing rebellion among the soldiers. Some people imagine, actually, some people are listening to Jeremiah. Okay? So the priests and the prophets, with the king's consent, lower Jeremiah into a pit where he goes without water and food for a while and almost dies. He remains in prison until the Babylonians take Jerusalem. When Jerusalem is destroyed, he does not go to Babylonia with most of the exiles. He goes to Egypt. And like most of the prophets, we don't know how or exactly when or where he died. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin applies a Yiddish proverb to the life of Jeremiah. He says, truth never dies, but it lives a wretched life. Right? And so, like most of the prophets, Jeremiah is only a hero after his death. Now, Jeremiah cares very much about Israel. He's not, without feeling for the people in spite of their sins. I'm going to share with you this passage from chapter 8. One of the problems with this edition is the pages are a little difficult to turn. All right. When in grief I would seek comfort, my heart is sick within me. Is not the Lord in Zion? Is not her king within her? Why then did they anger me with their images, with alien futilities? Hark, the outcry of my poor people from the land far and wide. The people who are suffering, even if they earned it. Harvest is past, summer is gone, but we have not been saved. Because my people is shattered, I am shattered. I am dejected, seized by desolation. It's a phrase you've heard. Is there no balm in Gilead? Can no physician be found? Why has healing not yet come to my poor people? Oh, that my head were water, my eyes a fount of tears. Then would I weep day and night for the slain of my poor people. Okay? So, Jeremiah definitely loves his people, cares about his people, is sad about what's going to happen to them. Right? And in the end, he sort of changes his tune. Once Jerusalem is destroyed, he changes his message from denunciation to hope. He said, don't give up hope. He actually invests in real estate in Israel as a way of saying, have faith, because we will come back. Right? You've earned this exile, but you will come back. Right? So, he has hope, but the hope is in the future. The situation, when Jerusalem is destroyed is pretty bleak. Right? Back, and was bleak, looking at it from the right perspective, it was bleak even before then. That, King Jehoiakim uses forced labor to build a luxurious palace, right? So nobody cares about the widow or the orphan. Nobody does anything to stop murder and theft or idolatry for that matter. Jeremiah just, cannot hold back from telling the truth about this. Another, his word was a raging fire in my heart. Right? So when we talk about Jeremiah, and for that matter, many of the prophets, we have to deal with the issue of suffering. Why would God bring so much suffering to the prophet? I know the other people, the Israelites, they've earned a certain amount of punishment. Right? Why the prophet? Why does he have to get that? Right? This is where I want to bring in famous passage from Isaiah, actually, 2nd Isaiah, chapter 53. So, passage you may be familiar
Oh,
with.
yeah.
Who can believe what we have heard? Upon whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he has grown by his favor like a tree crown, like a tree trunk out of arid ground. He had no form of beauty that we should look at him, no charm that we should find him pleasing. He was despised, shunned by men, a man of suffering, familiar with disease, as one who hid his face from us. He was despised. We held him of no account. Yet it was our sickness that he was bearing, our suffering that he endured. We accounted him plagued, smitten, and afflicted by God, but he was wounded because of our sins, crushed because of our iniquities. He bore the chastisement that made us whole, and by his bruises we were healed. We all went astray like sheep, each going his own way, and the Lord visited upon him the guilt of all of us.
Sounds very Christ-like.
Oh, that's
Oh,
what they
yeah,
use it
well,
for.
that's-
Why I recognize
Yeah,
it.
so, the one who suffers the most is the true servant in this passage. And it is one of the most famous passages in the prophets. This is the dispute between Jews and Christians. Looking at this passage, Jews see it as a reference to the Jewish people, to our place among the nations.
Well, it says that if you keep reading.
Yes.
Like to quote one.
Yes, Christians generally read it as foretelling the coming of Jesus.
Sounds very.
Right? So what I want to suggest to you is the idea that suffering, bad though it is, nobody wants it, suffering confers a certain legitimacy. And to explain that, I want to share with you an idea which I found among one of the writers about the prophets, but I've expanded upon it here. So I want you to imagine a woman upon whom fortune has smiled since the day she was born. I'll call her Sunny. Okay? Right? Sunny was born on third base. Right? She's not arrogant. She's not like that the saying about the guy who was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. Right? Okay, she was born on third base. She knows she was born on third base. She is aware of the advantages that she was given. She's loved by her family. She's admired by her friends. She's bright. She's attractive. She has good teeth. This is how you know she's not Jewish. She never had to go to an orthodontist, right? Okay? That's, she got a good education and she took advantage of it, right? And she got a great job. She has an adoring husband, equally adoring children. She's never experienced rejection, not in her personal life, not in her professional life. She's always had a very confident and cheerful disposition. And she's been honored by her colleagues and her community. That's Sunny. Now you might say, well, God would look favorably on Sunny because she's doing the right things, okay? And she's done good things with what she was given, right? Maybe so. The question is, could Sunny be a legitimate spokesperson for God in a time of crisis?
Not based on her experience.
Not based on her experience. Because if you've never dealt with misfortune, how have you earned the right to speak about the meaning of life? Sunny never had her heart broken. Never had any pain more serious than, maybe a broken wrist as a kid, right? She certainly never had to worry about where her next meal was coming from or for her family. She hasn't experienced the underside of life. Sunny never had to deal with misfortune. So, she hasn't had to call on the moral strength to overcome misfortune. So how do we know what the moral fiber of a person is if their life has been a cakewalk? The untested. Certain commitments have to be tested if we're going to know that they're real. Right? The ultimate testing in the Bible is what happens to Job. Right? Job is not really part of this course, but you know the story of Job. Job gets everything taken away from him, and sort of like, well, now will you curse God? Right? And he doesn't, but he says, I want an explanation. Why is this all happening to me? Right? So, he's definitely been tested. Sunny hasn't been tested. Right? Now, suffering can kill a person, or at least it can be very debilitating. Right? It's not always noble. It's the overcoming of it, the ability to be true to your ideals, even when life stinks. That's, I think, the verdict on Jeremiah. Jeremiah deals with a tremendous amount of suffering, and he just keeps on going. And he never loses his sympathy either for God or for the Jews. But he knows what's right, and he keeps calling it. It's like the umpire who says, balls and strikes, I call them as I see them. And Jeremiah calls it as God sees it, right? The prophets in general are sensitive to the suffering of others, to lives of poverty, to lives without hope. And it's kind of like, what Hillel said later on, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? What sort of person am I? Right? And some people get to the stage of understanding this at a very early age. Others get a rude awakening later. Best to get it now, because after all, if not now, when? Right? By the way, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg has a wonderful teaching about this insight from Hillel. He said, the Roman hedonists proclaimed, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. The sage's counterpoint is, you only live once, so do a mitzvah today. Yeah? So, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, good for him. Right? So anyway, this is where Jeremiah excels. It's not just that he is suffering, he suffers for the wretched poor, for the oppressed laborer, for the widow and the orphan. Right? Jeremiah is a tortured soul, but not just because of his own misfortune, but because he bears a message about misfortune. He identifies with the suffering of others, a lot like Hosea did. Hosea was made to identify with the suffering of God who was betrayed by the people of Israel. And he identifies with the suffering of the many. Yeah, Jerry. You have a comment? Okay.
Could I ask? a
Yeah,
question?
please.
Did Jeremiah have anybody that was on his side in the community anywhere?
He had his scribe and, occasionally a couple of people who
So he
came around
He
and,
didn't have any,
Rescued
he didn't have any groupies at all, basically.
well, just one.
Yeah.
One real groupie and maybe a few other people who sort of knew that he was right, but they were the powerless.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Lou.
Jeremiah advises not to form an alliance with Egypt. And yet he ends up going to Egypt. Is there
Yeah.
anything to that? And is there any other analogy with the patriarchs who all at one time in their lives go to Egypt?
We don't know exactly why he goes to Egypt, but my theory is, just a theory, he goes because he's already burned his bridges with too many of the people who are being dragged into exile.
That's probably true, especially since he was right.
Yeah, people hate it when the prophet is proved right. The messenger, is the one who gets shot. I think that's why Jeremiah goes to Egypt. He says, yeah, I'm still one of us, but, maybe there's a few Jews in Egypt. So that's where I'm gonna go. Better if you're not tempted to. Other questions or comments? Okay. We covered a lot of Jeremiah today. Yeah. So, you got all you need for Jeremiah. We'll go, we have others to cover, but,
Happy thoughts for Sunday?
yeah, happy
Life
thoughts.
thinking.
Happy thoughts to inspire your week. That is not Jeremiah. Jeremiah does not bring happy thoughts with him. But,
Poor Jeremiah.
important thoughts. That's the thing about teaching and studying the prophets. They're not fun. They're really not fun. Yeah.
Why did he, among all the prophets, generate so much animosity? The other prophets seem that
They got ignored.
basically that was it, they got ignored, where
Yeah.
he was listened to, and they didn't like what he was prophesizing, obviously.
Yeah, because here he is seen as a threat to power. Maybe Amos and Hosea were not seen that way. They were just madmen preaching on the street. Jeremiah, he's mad, all right, but not that way.
It's interesting, it's really reminded me of Martin Luther King.
Yeah, I mean, Martin Luther King was the most hated man in America in his lifetime. Now we have a national holiday, bully.
Right.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
But he didn't suffer materially.
He didn't have a lot of joy either, I don't think. Yeah, materially, he could support himself and his family, but he had a lot of suffering. And he certainly didn't die in bed.
No.
He drank the carrot tree, didn't he? So that's either one.
Sorry?
Is he talking about Jeremiah?
You're talking about Martin.
Yeah. We don't know where Jeremiah died.
Modern day
I
Jeremiah?
have no information whether MLK liked carrots.
Did Jeremiah die in bed? We don't know. Give it a shot.
Yeah.
This is good.
Yeah. Okay, thank you all very much. We'll see you next
Are you in
week.
a hurry?
We do have class
Really?
next week, Jennifer, right?
Correct, and then we're off for 2 weeks after that.